for public school students.
Chair recognizes Mr. Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, polling data has shown that even though a majority of Americans still hold negative views about communism, our younger generations have increasingly been more receptive to collectivist ideologies. This bill in front of you now, Senate Bill 24. Hang on, I'm laying out a bill. Hold on just a sec. Senate Bill 24 seeks to address this generational disparity by directing the State Board of Education to include developmentally appropriate, comprehensive education on the history, tactics, and consequences of communism into the TEKS for 4th to 12th grade social studies. The intent of this bill is to ensure a factual and comprehensive education on communist atrocities paired with a comparison to our great American principles and preventing ideological indoctrination through the use of well-documented historical evidence. Move passage.
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Chair Leach. Just a couple of questions. On page 1, on sub 1, you note to include the history and tactics used by communist movements inside the United States. In the United States, did I read that correctly?
You talking about the bill?
Yes, the bill.
Where are you looking at?
Page 1, line 15.
The history of and tactics used by communist movements in the United States.
I read that correctly, right?
Yes,
Okay.
the language is what the language is.
I'm curious about that because I know you're a very well educated person. You're aware of the McCarthy movement between 1950 and 1954, correct?
Correct.
And during that period, there were many allegations made against public officials, celebrities, professors, people who I guess Senator McCarthy disagreed with, and he named them as communists without any proof. You're familiar with that history, correct?
Of course, yes.
And many of those people had their entire careers destroyed. There were both criminal and civil consequences for them. Many people got prosecuted, were put on trial for things that they had nothing to do with. People were dragged in front of the U.S. Senate to answer for things that they had nothing to do with. Why is that going to be included in the history and tactics used by communist movements in the United States?
Well, I think, look, I don't want to get into a in-depth discussion about the atrocities of communism. I'm happy to do that. I'm not sure now is the time or this bill is the place to do it, but it's clear to me that communist movements in the United States can be traced back all the way to World War I. You have cited some examples during the McCarthyism era where there were accusations made from people against people whom were innocent, but there's also a vast number of, probably countless examples in our nation's history where the communist movements, both expressly and hidden in all sectors of our society, were prevalent. And this bill seeks to prevent that from ever happening again by teaching the appropriate and accurate history to our students in 4th through 12th grade.
So I kind of actually am on that point. You've said that this history should be comprehensive, it should be accurate. Now, talking about the history of people who were accused of being communists in the United States, people that you personally said on the front mic, that people who were found to be innocent, that should be a part of the education if it is to be a complete and accurate, should it not?
And I'm sure it will be.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that the accusation, the spread of communism started prior to World War I. You understand that much of that history was because of the labor movement, that the accusations were that the people who were demanding fair wages, people who were demanding more reasonable work hours, people who were demanding that there be workplace safety and that just not have people crushed by machines every day, that they were communists because they were asking for rights for workers.
Sure, and I would agree with you that an American citizen who simply supported FDR or the New Deal initiatives during the 30s
Exactly.
and 40s those people, just by way of supporting FDR, the New Deal initiatives, aren't in and of themselves communist. However, I would also say that there's no question, and history supports, that communist membership increased substantially during those years. And that is a part of our nation's history that in many ways needs to be taught, not just of the greatest generation and the fight against fascism and communism in World War II, but also just the reality of communism, what it has meant for people all over the world and what it has meant here in our own country. And contrasting that with our great American ideals, there's a stark difference. It is black and white, night and day, when it comes to the ideals underlying communism, the foundations of communism, and the foundation of the great country of America. And that's what we want to teach our students in 4th through 12th grades in our public schools.
Absolutely, and just as a intellectual point, and I know you are very well educated. You have a law degree and many other degrees. Should a well-rounded education not include the complete history of what happened? Granted that there were probably significant increases in membership, whatever, but the number of people being accused of being communists was nowhere close to the actual membership, and that many Americans were attacked, were prosecuted, both civilly and criminally, accused of being communists when all they were asking for were rights for themselves and rights for their coworkers.
At no point have I argued or will I argue that the American system is perfect and that there are not flaws. We are a government of the people and by the people and for the people, and therefore the people are going to not be perfect. And so certainly we should teach our students accurate history, including the imperfections in American history. But when it comes to communism and the devastation that communism has caused across the world, and that could have been caused here in America had there not been generations of great Americans who fought against it, then I think we are doing our students a great disservice. And when I see the polling about how over 80% of Americans, over 85% of Americans oppose strongly the tenets of communism, but we are seeing an increasing interest in communism among our younger generations, that's of great concern to me. And I have a position, as you do here, to say what we want to be taught to our kids in the TEKS, and I believe that the true history of communism should be part of that history.
Absolutely, and I personally would have crafted this bill, if this was my bill, I would personally have crafted it to talk about American democracy and why democracy and in a liberal society that grants every person freedoms is more important, that it's a better system instead of just one. Because you would agree with me that there are other systems of government that are also problematic and dangerous, like authoritarianism, theocracies, dictatorships. Those are also systems of government that our country has both fought against and are ideologically opposed to. Would you not agree?
I think I don't know if I misheard you, but I just want to make sure I understood. Did you just say that democracy grants our citizens rights?
Yes, a democracy that grants everyone equal rights is superior.
The American form of government, our democracy, does not grant me rights, and it does not grant you rights. You have God-given rights, and I do as well. And our system of government is designed and is meant to protect those rights, to safeguard those rights.
I think we're talking about the same thing.
Well, I don't think we're talking about the same thing, because communism disagrees with what I just said, is that you don't have God-given rights. The government gives you rights. The government gives you property. The government gives you everything you have, and you have no fundamental rights that are therefore to be protected.
Absolutely.
God-given rights to be protected by the government. And so you are making my point for me. This is why we need an accurate history lesson between the ideals that undergird communism and the ideals that undergird our American system of government.
And I don't disagree with you.
I don't
disagree with you. What I'm asking is, the things that you've talked about, the philosophy of where people get their rights, the same would be true in a dictatorship, the same would be true in an authoritarian regime, the same would be true in a theocracy. Should we not discuss those systems of government since those are antithetical to our American democracy as well.
If you want to bring a bill that talks about other systems of government and how they are how they compare to our great American system here of freedom and capitalism and free markets, then I'd be happy to entertain that bill. That is not what this bill is intended.
Absolutely.
That is outside the scope of this bill.
In your bill, does your bill direct schools to talk about the difference between a government and the people that come from those countries?
The bill is very, very clear, Representative Wu. If you have a specific question about a section of the bill, I'm happy to go through it.
There's
with
nothing
you.
in your bill that talks about that, correct?
That talks about, say it again?
That
What?
there is for example, that there is a difference between Cubans who are coming here and fleeing Cuba and the Cuban government as a whole.
I would direct you to page 2 of the bill, section G, lines 7 through 10.
Okay.
The bill makes very clear that the history should be taught about the oppression and suffering experienced by people living under communist regimes, including mass murder, violent land seizures, show trials, concentration camps, forced labor, poverty, and general economic deterioration. Whether those people came from Cuba, from some other country, communist China, wherever it may be, any people group, any person that has experienced the oppression and the suffering that communism has brought and still brings, then those groups, those people groups should be talked about.
And my question is, should your bill make a special point to point out to students that it is not appropriate to treat individuals from those countries as having the qualities of those countries, saying like just because you're a refugee from Cuba, it does not make you a communist?
That is correct. However, if I say I'm a communist, then that does make me a communist. And if I say I believe in the communist principles, then that does make me a communist. And if I respond to a poll, which many of our younger generations are doing, saying I'm kind of interested in this communism thing, and I don't really understand how it differs from the American system of government and the great American miracle that we have here, that's what we're trying to do, is to prevent what you're talking about. We are trying to prevent the spread of and the rooting of communism in our public schools.
And I appreciate that, and I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm asking is more specific, is that would you entertain an amendment that says that specifically we want to make sure that students, as they're being taught this, are taught the difference between individuals who have not made one choice or another, who have not made statements, who have not taken any action except come to our country, except often to flee these countries, to flee these repressive regimes, and to come here to say we should not treat people as a whole that they are one way or the other unless they've done something themselves. If they themselves have said, I am this or I am that, that's one thing, but we should not presuppose that for people just because of where they come from.
I believe that's included in the context of this bill already, Representative Wu.
Thank you.
Thank you.